Do you think black cardstock is only used for layers? Let me prove you wrong. Let's get crafting.
We're going to make die cut backgrounds, but instead of using a background die, I'm going to create my own using these Slimline dies called Floral Borders from scrapbook.com. They don't really get a whole lot of love. I don't do Slimline cards for the most part, so use what you got. And this is what I've got. So I'm using this cute little daisy chain, and I'm going to die cut a whole bunch of them. Now I've cut a panel of white cardstock and a piece of double-sided adhesive. This one happens to be by scrapbook.com to 3 3/4 inches by 5. And I'm going to use my anti-static bag on my daisy chains. I don't want anything to stick to the top of the daisy chains. I just want the base of the daisy chain to stick to the adhesive. And then there's going to be exposed adhesive, so we're going to finish that off. Now I'm just removing one corner of the adhesive. This way I can apply it to a small portion of the card, make sure it's lined up, then slowly remove the released paper from the back. Now don't get rid of that released paper because you can use it for other things. Here I'm just going ahead and making sure that it is firmly attached and removing the top layer. Now you can opt to go vertical if you want to, but I decided to go on a diagonal. It is a little more forgiving than a true vertical pattern. Now as you can see, my fingers keep sticking to the double-sided adhesive, but I'm just offsetting the daisies just a little bit and trying to keep them as lined up as best that I can. You're going to notice that there's a small gap there, but no worries, we're going to fix everything up. Now, I should have used my release paper earlier to keep my fingers from sticking, but this is a great way to really adhere your items, whatever they may be, to the double-sided adhesive. Now, I'm using a pair of Tim Holtz long bladed shears to cut off any remaining daisies from my cardstock, and I'm just going to use the leftovers to finish off the pattern. If you'd like to get in touch with me, I'll leave all the contact information for the best way down below in the description box, including my email and P.O. box. Now, what to do about the rest of the adhesive? My first thought was silver glitter because I love that. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll show you something different. So I'm going to use white heat embossing. Black and white contrast makes a very bold statement when you're making a card. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere my white embossing powder. This is super fine detail from Ranger, and it's just going to coat the remainder part of the adhesive, and then we're going to go ahead and melt it. Do you have a suggestion for a future video? Let me know in the comments below. Probably the most common way to use cardstock is as a layer, and I want to bring that into this card. So I'm using my Bearly Arts Precision Craft Glue, and somebody in my last video asked what I use the rubber band for, and that's it. I tuck the silicone topper that I use in place of a pin into the rubber band so it doesn't get in the way when I'm using the glue. I am making an A2 size top folding card. This is Accent Opaque 100-pound cardstock. And I'm going to go ahead and layer up our die cut background on top of that. Now I will show you all the finished cards at the end. On to the next technique. I'm going to be using this old letter stamp. This is by Woodware, and I've had it for a long time, so I'm not even sure if it's still available. But if it is, I'll link all of the items that I'm using today to the best of my ability down in the description box below. I am using a stamping platform. This is by Stampin' Up. It is no longer manufactured, but quite honestly, I paid good money for it and it still works perfectly fine, so I'm going to use it. There's no point in changing out to a Misty just because that's what's the most popular item today. I have used my anti-static powder bag on my black cardstock, and I'm inking up my stamp with some Versamark clear sticky ink. This stamp is never meant to be read. It is pretty much indescribable, but I do ink it up and stamp twice, so I make sure I get good coverage. I'm just using a piece of old copy paper, and this is old Stampendous fine detail embossing powder. Use what you have. I have a plethora of this, so I may as well use it. I also have Ranger Super Fine Detail in gold, but that's what was closest, so once again, that's what we use. I did heat up my heat embossing tool for about 15 seconds prior to heat embossing. I do find that it keeps my paper from warping too much. Many of the techniques that we use on white cardstock can certainly be used on black. This is a 3D embossing folder by Altenew. It is called Book Cover Engravings, and I've just embossed a piece of black cardstock. Now we're going to use the white pigment technique, and we're simply dragging white pigment ink over the 3D raised portion of this embossed image. Be sure to turn your cardstock so that you get good coverage with your white pigment ink. You can turn it every which way and get as much pigment ink on there as you want. Just remember, pigment ink is sitting on top of your cardstock, so be careful that you don't put your fingers in it because you will end up with inky fingers. But you can go ahead and hit it with a heat tool if you want to dry it faster, or simply let it dry. And remember that the pigment ink on the black will dry back. It won't be as stark white as you see here. Let's use a couple of pastes and a layering stencil with our cardstock. Now this is mixed media cardstock. It is very heavyweight, and it is 340 GSM. Now I got this at Hobby Lobby. It's their brand, and I've just cut it down to A2 size. I'm also going to be using this Simon Hurley layering stencil, his Lunar Paste in Prom Queen, and Tim Holtz's texture paste in Texture Sparkle. Now I am putting a silicone mat down on my glass mat. Even though nothing really bothers the glass mat, I like that I can just bring this little travel size silicone mat right to my sink and wash it right up. This stencil is called Happy Hearts, and it's a 2-piece stencil. The one stencil has smaller hearts, and that's the one I'm going to use to start with. So I'm just kind of seeing where my hearts are going to fall on my piece of black cardstock. I'm going to create a hinge using some low-tack tape. This one is by scrapbook.com. It's called Mint Tape, and I am adhering it to my glass mat. It won't stick to the silicone mat. This way I can create a hinge, line up my cardstock, and it won't bounce around anywhere. For a long time, I have used press and seal in all of my jars of paste. That way it keeps the paste fresh and doesn't dry out. And it absolutely works. It's economical. I just don't like the mess necessarily on the lid, so I am scraping that off. But you'll also notice that I had a black rubber band there. In one of Tim Holtz's videos, he discovered that the paste stays fresh when it's still factory sealed and has that outside covering to it. So he figured out that if you use a wide rubber band, which that black one is, it keeps the paste fresh. He's been using it for many, many months, and it still works. So I am giving it a shot because I'd appreciate not having the mess of the press and seal. Like I said, I love it. It works. I just don't like that there's product on it when I lift it up. Now, this is Texture Paste Sparkle. It is a clear paste with glitter in it. It kind of reminds me of Formica tables like from the 1960s. It's beautiful. You can color it. You can use a dye-based refill to color it, and you'll still see the glitter. I don't know that I would use Distress Oxide refills because those are opaque, and you probably wouldn't see too much of the glitter if you used it. I've scraped the remainder of my paste back into the jar, and I'm sealing it up, and this time I'm only replacing it with the black rubber band. Now the key to this is making sure that there's a good seal between the lid and the base jar. Now I did leave these to dry for about an hour, and as you can see, they've got some beautiful sparkle to them. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the large hearts on top, and I'm going to do the exact same process, except for this time I'm going to use Lunar Paste in Prom Queen. This time I've created a hinge using some washi tape because I couldn't find my scrapbook.com mint tape. I am definitely not wasting anything that is left on the press and seal, and I'm applying it with a plastic palette knife. Same one I used before. I did speed this video up way up because I didn't want to bore you to tears. Now remember, if you are new to using pastes, don't let this dry on any of your equipment. As soon as you're done using it, scrape the remainder off back into your pot, seal up the pot, and go and wash your tools. A good rule of thumb is to have a Tupperware container there and just drop all your wet tools right into the water that's sitting on your desk, and then that way your tools won't dry with that paste. In fact, most of it should dissolve before you ever get to the sink. Now this turns out beautifully, and we're going to see what the final card looks like towards the end. Let's go on to the next one. If you've been card making for a long time, this probably won't come as a shock to you, but you can heat emboss your sentiments. Now I'm going to do some white heat embossing, but there's a twist at the end. So if you think you've seen this before, hold up, because maybe this is something completely new to you. Let me know in the comments below after I show this to you if you've ever seen it. I did feature it in a video a long time ago, but we'll see if you remembered how to do it. Now, I've used my anti-static powder bag on a piece of black cardstock. I am using a rather thick sentiment because I really want you to see the finished product. This is a new stamp. I haven't used it, so I did condition it with a little bit of Versamark first. Then I'm applying some white pigment ink. Again, this is Distress ink in Picket Fence, and I have inked it up. I'm going to ink it up several times because it is new and I want to get a good impression. White pigment ink. The reason I tend to use it is when you're white heat embossing, specifically on black cardstock, the white pigment ink will allow the white heat embossing to become much brighter white if you're using it rather than just using the Versamark. So I've turned my cardstock around so I can get two images. One we're going to do in white, and the other, well, I've got a surprise for you. Here I'm using Ranger embossing powder in super fine white, and I am embossing both images, dumping that back in the pot and making sure I put the lid on so I don't dump it. I have preheated my heat tool and I'm embossing the sentiments now. And as you can see, well, if I'd hold it up further, you'd see actually. Hang on, we'll get there. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so there's the white heat embossing. Definitely a bright white with the white pigment ink. Now let's switch it up a bit. Besides metallic embossing powder, how can you get color into your sentiments? By using alcohol markers. Now, this is a really inexpensive set of alcohol markers that I got from Amazon way back when. I don't even know if they're still around, but they don't blend real well, so I try to use them for other things. I've selected a blue. I would not use your Copic markers on this if at all possible. The roughness of the embossing powder can damage the nibs on the Copic markers. Because I'm using really inexpensive alcohol markers here, it doesn't bother me at all to use them. You can use the chisel side or the bullet side. In this case, I like the bullet. I feel like I have a little bit more control over where the blue ink is going. But by coloring over that white embossing powder, I get to have colored sentiments for my cards. And that's a win in my book. Let's take a look at some finished cards. We've used die cuts to create our background with white embossing powder, finished with a metallic sentiment on vellum. I've added an inked sunflower to our metallic heat embossed background with a simple black and white sentiment. The white pigment ink technique on our 3D embossing folder is finished off with a metallic layer and a simple birthday sentiment. These adorable skunks finish off our double pasted background for our black cardstock. Our colorful sentiment is enhanced by using black cardstock as a silhouette feature. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and giving me a thumbs up. In the meantime, check out some other videos that I've selected just for you. Until next time, I'll see you real soon.